Let me just briefly introduce somebody I know real well, my son, Jeff. When you're a father, I remember when first time he beat me playing basketball, I did the very mature thing and never played with him anymore when it came to basketball. And now that he's got his doctor's degree and doing all kinds of stuff, when he starts teaching me stuff, I just have quit reading books at all, which is a spiritually mature thing. But Jeff is the Chief Officer of Innovation at St. Leo University in north of Tampa. And I have watched over the years as he's worked a lot with online learning, the digital age, dealing with younger people, basically training schools, administrators, and faculty in how to communicate with this newer generation. And so I just asked him if he would put together some of the stuff that I have been learning from him every time we get together, but do it in a way that would help us in our ministries of reaching people 40 and younger, which, as many of you know, and sometimes is a difficult generation to reach because we just don't always understand that generation. So I've asked Jeff to take about 30 minutes or so and make a presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions and go from there. So Jeff, it's yours. Go for it.
Awesome. Thanks, Dad. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys. You see the title slide? ABC?
Yep, you're good. You're good.
Perfect. Okay. What I'd like you to start by having you do, please, is if you could, on a piece of scratch paper, or if you can remember in your head, that's fine, just somewhere write down 10 ticks of heads or tails. If you were going to flip a coin 10 times, what do you think it would land on the first time, the second, the third, all the way up through 10? So just an H or a T, if you will. Write that down really quickly. Just jot that down for yourself. Okay. I hope I gave you enough time to do that. There was an interesting study that was done fairly recently that talked about the concept of randomness. And when you start looking at millennials, and sometimes people are starting to now talk about Generation Y, Generation Z, the younger folks that are even starting to become employable. As you look at that age group of people, there's an interesting brain phenomenon when it comes to randomness. They are actually able to generate and identify randomness and use randomness in ways that are harder for people over the age of 25. They did this study where they took people ages 4 to 91 and asked them to do what I just asked you to do, as well as a lot. But the people who were under the age of 25, very different answers. So it's all 25. Let me show you what the top answer was for those over the age of 25. After 25 years of age, most people created a pattern. They did 2 of one, 2 of another, and then 1, 1. So as you see here, 2 heads, 2 tails, heads, tail. 2 heads, 2 tails, head, tail. And that was what pattern most people fell into over time. Now they did more than 10, they did 100, but that was the pattern most people had. The second most frequent pattern by people over 25 was really simple. Head, tail, head, tail, head, tail, head, tail. They were trying to mimic what the randomness could be, because we know it could be either each time. But if you look at that, both of those things are absolutely patterns. Under the age of 25, however, they found that people were far, far better at truly generating a random pattern. The pattern has algorithmic sequence to it. In other words, the pattern ability that we look for in our employees, that we look for in the maturation of students, that we want people to develop and grow, when you look at things like creativity, innovation, entrepreneurialism, and really a desire for social connectedness, people that are under the age of 25 experience and value randomness in ways that people over the age of 25 have a very difficult time mimicking. So what we have done with things like this at St. Leo is we've asked ourselves a really, I think, important question. Who is explaining to our incoming students why St. Leo should be appealing? When we try to generate culture, when we try to create an environment for them to live in, I don't know that I'm the right person to say, I want to tell you about a really appealing experience you're going to have here at St. Leo. I've generated an experience that I think will help you be successful based on what you need to do to impress me in the first place. So we're starting to ask more and more our 23, 25, 27-year-olds, what's appealing to you about St. Leo University? And I think it's a lesson that could be learned by churches that are really trying to make their mark with people under the age of 40. What appeals to those people? Take that information and do something with it. If you were to look at my word cloud as to kind of who I am, these would be the pieces of information, at least some of the pieces of information, that would go into it. I am the Chief Innovation Officer at St. Leo. I love this job. I am a speaker. I've gone around the globe talking in countries. I've talked to different people about how to transform culture, learning, vision, strategy, leadership, those sorts of things, as well as education and communication. But there's other pieces that make up who I am. You see my daughter's name in there, perhaps. I've got a dog. His name's Doug. He's in there somewhere. There's all these disparate pieces that really, until you put them into a pattern, they don't really help you understand who I am until that pattern exists. Well, today, what I want to talk to you about is some of the frameworks, some of the patterns that we can start to use by which to get out of some of the patterns that I think we have fallen into. I'm going to try to answer some of the questions that went out to you in the abstract. Can we recruit better? Can we connect better? Can we give better communication and then therefore satisfaction to the people who come to your churches? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, if we adhere to certain principles. Now, these frameworks come from a lot of different places. These are just a few of the examples that I can give you that talk about some of the places where I get my information. I try very hard to utilize associative thinking, which Jeff Dyer in his book, The Innovator's DNA, would talk about how crucial it is that you get ideas from outside context. So I'm trying as hard as I can to always find how it's being done somewhere else and bringing that into higher education. And some of those frameworks you will start to see come out here today. So really what I want to get to is, where is the Goldilocks zone? If you've never heard that term before, it's what scientists have used for a long time to describe a lot of different things, including where our planet sits in relationship to the sun. So there are Goldilocks zones out there for other planets that they're starting to look to say, if we ever had to leave this one, could we go somewhere else and sustain life? Well, you have to be so far from the sun, but not too far from the sun. That's the Goldilocks zone. When it comes to what we do in our world, I take that Goldilocks concept to some work that was done by a man named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, a researcher out of Poland, who talked about the importance of the concept of flow. Flow is something that has to do with how we interact with our world and our culture. It applies to very specific contexts. He applies it very often to gaming and game mechanics, but it absolutely applies to companies. Google and Microsoft have utilized flow in hiring practices, and a lot of other organizations have really started to adopt this. And I want to use that as a real recipe, if you will, for what I want to present to you today. So flow is based on a couple of concepts. It's based on the notice that the idea that something is challenging, and that's not necessarily in a sports-related sense. It is something that is challenging in a good way, something that you hope to have just the right amount of challenge. But at the same time, you can do it. You've got enough skill that you can make it happen, or you can learn enough skill to make it happen. And Mihai Csikszentmihalyi would say that when you have enough challenge and enough skill, that people will be engaged in whatever your activity happens to be, whether that's playing a video game or working for Google or attending church. Now, there's a zone here that we're really trying to look for, because you can have too much of any of those things. You can have too much challenge, you can have too much skill required. And you're really looking to find something in the middle, that Goldilocks zone, where you've got people who are giving you your attention, they're interested and they are absolutely focused on what you want them to focus on. They're connecting with other people while they're having a good time, and they feel good about that experience. They're satisfied all throughout. When you accomplish all of that, you really are achieving flow. So when it comes to how we at St. Leo look at how to work with the next generation and the one after that, we are really trying to find that area of flow. We're leveraging a lot of neuroscience. And so what I want to try to do is show you how you can apply that inside of this framework in order to, I think, help you recruit, help you communicate, help you present just a little bit better. I want to start with a quick video clip by a guy named Simon Sinek. You probably know him. He is a TED presenter, and he has done a lot of work in and around millennials, and he gets this question all the time. You'll hear him say that. He does a pretty nice job, I think, serving up on a foundation what it is I want to talk about for our session today. So just what Simon Sinek has to say.
What's the millennial question?
Apparently, millennials as a generation, which is a group of people who were born approximately 1984 and after, are tough to manage. And they're accused of being entitled and narcissistic and self-interested, unfocused, lazy. But entitled is the big one. And because they confound leadership so much, what's happening is leaders are asking the millennials, what do you want? And millennials are saying, we want to work in a place with purpose, love that. We want to make an impact, you know, whatever that means. We want free food and beanbags. And so somebody articulates some sort of purpose, there's lots of free food and there's beanbags, and yet for some reason, they're still not happy. And that's because they're missing. There's a missing piece. What I've learned is that I can break it down into 4 pieces. Right? There are four things, 4 characteristics. One is parenting. The other one is technology. The third is impatience, and the fourth is environment. The generation that we call the millennials, too many of them grew up subject to, not my words, failed parenting strategies. You know, where, for example, they were told that they were special all the time. They were told that they could have anything they want in life, just because they want it, right? They were told, some of them got into honors classes, not because they deserved it, but because their parents complained. And some of them got A's, not because they earned them, but because the teachers didn't want to deal with the parents. Some kids got participation medals. You got a medal for coming in last. Right? Which the science we know is pretty clear, which is it devalues the medal and the reward for those who actually work hard, and it actually makes the person who comes in last feel embarrassed because they know they didn't deserve it, so it actually makes them feel worse, right? So you take this group of people, and they graduate school, and they get a job, and they're thrust into the real world, and in an instant, they find out they're not special, their moms can't get them a promotion, that you get nothing for coming in last, and by the way, you can't just have it because you want it. Right? And in an instant, their entire self-image is shattered. And so you have an entire generation that's growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations. The other problem, to compound it, is we're growing up in a Facebook, Instagram world. In other words, we're good at putting filters on things. We're good at showing people that life is amazing even though I'm depressed, right? And so everybody sounds tough. And everybody sounds like they got it all figured out. And the reality is there's very little toughness, and most people don't have it figured out. And so when the more senior people say, well, what should we do? They sound like, this is what you got to do. And they have no clue. Right?
Jeff, you need to get back on. Can't hear you.
Sorry, how about that?
There you go.
There.
Sorry.
So I'm sure some of you are facing those challenges as leaders of churches. I think that sets us up pretty nicely for what I want to focus on today. So when we talk about getting in the flow zone, if you will, I think there's 2 things, first of all, that we want to try to avoid when it comes to dealing with younger and younger people. The first thing is anxiety. If you can avoid anxiety, you're setting yourself up for success. Now, anxiety is a person who comes into a situation or experience, and again, whether that's playing a video game, working for a company, or going to a church, that says, I hate something, I don't like something, it's too difficult, I can't accomplish this, I feel bad, I feel intimidated, I feel like this isn't something for me. This actually releases inside of a human system a neurotransmitter called glutamate. It lives in the base of your spine and just waits for opportunities to come out when you shouldn't be thinking. Now, essentially what it's designed for is this. If you're being chased by a bear That's not your time to think about why you're being chased by a bear. It's a much more important thing to figure out how I'm going to get out of here. You want to run. So glutamate comes out of your spine and starts to chew neurons. It starts to destroy neurons. Things you need. When a person feels anxious, so in my context, when students take tests, some of them get anxious to the point where they can't control their glutamate, and it goes out and starts destroying the neurons up and down their system, making it difficult for them to think. In a church context, this is someone who comes into a world and says, I don't like this, I'm uncomfortable with the requirements, with the prerequisites, with the assumptions that I believe you're putting on me, and that's intimidating to them. One of the ways that we want to try to avoid anxiety is through the use of socialness. There's a guy named Emery who did a set of experiments where he really discovered that there's a part of the brain that is connected all the time to socialness. We desire connecting to other people. Now, it doesn't mean anyone, someone important to us. So we want to connect to a person or a group that really is meaningful to us. And the only time in your life when that part of your brain turns off is when you're given a task. And when you do that task, you'll set yourself to doing it. And then as soon as the millisecond that task is done, you will reconnect your social part of your brain to look for someone to connect to. He wanted to see just how far he could take this. So he actually did this experiment. Some of you may have heard of this on NPR. He brought people into his lab and he put an fMRI machine helmet on their head. And he said, I just want to study your brain as you play virtual ball. He called it e-ball. And that's what you're seeing here. I want you to play virtual catch with two other people who we've also got helmets on out in my lab. And he just said, just control this joystick and throw the ball to whoever you want. Well, for 2 or 3 minutes, that's what was going on. But then something a little devious happened. See, there weren't two other people out in the lab. The other two were being controlled by Matthew Lieberman's assistants. And what they did after 3 minutes of time is they stopped throwing you the ball. In fact, they never threw it to you again. Now, if you're like me, the first time I saw this, after 5, 6 tosses, I thought, come on, just throw him the ball. Throw him the ball. Just give him the ball. That's rude. Don't be rude. Throw him the ball. But they never did. And they watched as these people's brains started to register something that surprised them a bit. The connection part of the brain turned off, and another part of the brain took over because glutamate and another bad stress hormone called cortisol started to engulf their systems. The part of their brain that lit up was the same part of your brain that lights up if you stub your toe or you hit your thumb with a hammer. It's the pain center. In other words, social pain and physical pain are not different to your brain. Your brain experiences both of them as pain. In fact, you can actually stifle social pain by taking Tylenol. You can make yourself feel better in terms of being socially snubbed or what you believe to be socially snubbed. Not having socialness leads to anxiety. So it really creates a quintessential question, I think, for churches. How many social experiences are your people having, especially when they walk in the door? Are you giving them the ability to connect to someone? Not everyone, that's overwhelming, but to connect to someone. Here at St. Leo, we're trying to do that very much with pairing up with people based on profiles and all sorts of other things. And there's the intrusiveness of asking too many questions, but there's the opportunity, the option to help them get to know someone. You want to give them an environment that is not anxiety-laced. So you want to take away the anxiety and the glutamate. The other thing you want to try to avoid is you want to try to avoid boredom. You want to get people who are interested in what you have to say, who don't think that something is so simplistic that it's beneath them, that they're not interested because they simply don't care about the problem or the process. Boredom is a real problem. Now, when it comes to boredom, what you're creating is cortisol. And cortisol, you probably read about in Time magazine, is that stress hormone that actually makes you overeat or undereat, oversleep or undersleep. It is a bad hormone for us. Cortisol is something I deal with in a school context all the time. Now, a lot of people talk about boredom as if it's a new phenomenon. This is a picture from back when I was in high school, and you can see that boredom was plenty prevalent back then as well. But education is often seen, and I think it's probably fair to say, having grown up in church is not always seen as the most exciting event or experience that you can have. So we want to try to avoid those moments of boredom. In fact, A person who reaches 7 minutes of boredom will actually have so much cortisol pumping through their blood they can't get any more. We are literally killing them with 7 minutes of boredom, so don't do that. Now, how can we start to avoid that? Let me give you another little task here. I'd like everybody to look at these cards that I've got here on this one screen, and I'm going to ask for one volunteer here in a second to share something with us. I'd like you to pick one out that you think demonstrates who you are and what your life is here at this moment in 2017. Which one of these pictures is a decent metaphor for your life? Which one connects you to the picture? What makes you think about it? So just take a second and look at it, and then I'll ask for somebody to share with us in just a moment.
Okay, before anybody shares, I've muted virtually all of you. We had some background noise. So if you want to speak, you've got to unmute yourself, all right?
All right, can we get one of you, please, to unmute yourself and tell us which one of these pictures you picked and why?
Well, first I need to say that somehow Stan's overriding my mute triggered my non-millennial genes. And so I'm too short-circuited right now. I've got to deal with my anxiety. Stan created massive anxiety.
I'm sorry.
That being said, I'm really just poking fun at my friend. I think I would choose the top left, although I wish the guy was halfway down the mountain, not on top, because that one looks too much like he's accomplished where he's going, and I don't feel that way. So that one halfway gets my metaphor.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now, I'm going to guess that almost everyone on the call, if not everyone on the call, can identify with that feeling. You've had it at some point. You know what it is to be climbing that mountain, to try to get to the top, to try to really muscle your way up to the top. We've experienced that too. And so what we all just got to go through was the notion of immediacy. We have a perceived psychological or physiological closeness now to the words that you just heard because you've had that happen in your life. Well, cortisol is often created when we don't feel connected, when we are bored because we're not invested. How do you get people invested? You get them to care. And if we learn from what we know about the connected brain, the social brain, it's best to try to get them to care about someone else. It's also best to try to get them to believe someone cares about them. We'll get to that here in a minute. But if you can find ways to develop experiences that allow your people coming in, especially younger and younger people, to feel a connection to another person and to learn about another person by which to care, you can avoid boredom, you can avoid anxiety just by the fact that they believe someone's there that is important enough for them to continue on this journey and to move into a relationship with Christ, not just a relationship with another person, but that person is the first step. That's how you start to get them there. So we want to avoid anxiety, we want to avoid boredom. Then we want to try to set up a very natural concept of stasis. We want to try to get people to feel good. Now, some of this is a bit out of our control, although we can make some adjustments and shift some things. But this means that people are sleeping well, they're eating well, they're exercising well. This definitely has some ramifications in terms of when you hold your church services, the kinds of food you serve at your church services. Exercise is a little bit difficult unless you're doing some sort of group yoga or something, I guess, on Tuesday night. But when it comes to stasis, it's important to note that serotonin is really what starts to get created. And serotonin is something that will be generated in a person if their body feels like they've gotten enough sleep, they've gotten the right kind of food. If all of these things happen, then really positive stuff comes from that. Let me tell you an activity that I try to employ with a lot of my audiences. I give them a sobriety test. And the reason that I do this is first of all, they like it. I literally have them stand up, I have them point at the walls, they look up at the ceiling, they close their eyes, and I have them stand up on one leg. And I tell them if they have to put their other leg down at any point while they're standing, and with my counting to 10, that they need to sit. So only the people standing at the end are those that were able to remain up on one leg for 10 seconds. Most of the audience can't do it. And the reason that most of the audience struggles with this activity is not because they're inebriated, although it's a very fun question to ask them how drunk they all are. But the reason that they can't do it is because of an alarm clock. Most people who wake up in the morning to an alarm clock actually wake up during a REM cycle. When you wake up during a REM cycle, you are cognitively impairing your ability to process information for your day. You are making it hard to think based on a couple of different nodes of your brain that want to remain in that kind of zone of sleep. We've been talking about this in education for a long time, and it's finally starting to pick up some momentum. ECS, this big think tank out of Washington, posted something last year that said the average high schooler loses 1.7 hours of sleep per night because of early school start times. John Medina, in the book that I recommended to you guys before this all began, he identifies what researchers term as the different kinds of sleepers. There are the larks. There are people who, and this represents about 10% of adults. It represents about 7% of adults over the age of 25. But 10% of adults are larks. They get up early, they feel good in the morning, they naturally rise, they often don't need an alarm clock. About 20% of adults are owls, what you probably think of as night owls. And again, under the age of 25, from 16 to 25, this represents about 40% of the population. But over the age of 25, that number norms back out to about 20%. And owls don't like to get up in the morning. They like to stay up late. They actually feel a surge of energy between 9 and 10 o'clock. And their serotonin levels change because of what happens with their circadian rhythms and the sun and those sorts of things. And then everyone else sort of fits somewhere in the middle as what researchers call a hummingbird. Well, here's what we know about larks. Larks should not be asked to learn new information after noon. Owls should not be asked to learn new information before 10:30. So finding ways to meet the needs of people based on these elements of stasis really is important. It also definitely impacts the food that you serve. You want to be really careful with the sugar, the caffeine. While that's a comfort food that people like, it does not help when it comes to communication. It does not help when it comes to what they will retain or remember. It really does not help in terms of their ability to connect to others. They connect to the food rather than to people. So you want to be very careful with the food that you serve and with the times that you ask people to come to a service because you can really affect their serotonin. The next thing you want to do as you drive up toward flow is you want to really promote caring. Now, we talked about this with getting rid of anxiety and getting rid of boredom and doing that through the concept of immediacy. But caring, it produces this interesting little neurotransmitter called oxytocin. Oxytocin comes out when a person feels cared for, when they feel that someone is being cooperative with them or trusts them enough to bring them in on a conversation or a decision. There's this interesting little study that was done in Europe, in England specifically, where they introduced grandmothers into an entire district full of K through 2 students. They followed those students over time, and they found that not only while they were in school in kindergarten, first and second grade, did they get better grades and did they persist better, but they found that all the way through high school, those students remained higher in terms of GPA, and they didn't drop out of school as much as the students who didn't have someone in their room who was simply there to care for them. Caring is something that humans really want. We desire that. And it's very difficult to care for someone else if you don't feel cared for. And millennials, as much as anyone, have grown up in an environment where they always felt cared for or even overprotected perhaps, only to come out into a world where they don't feel cared for any longer. So what we're trying to do with St. Leo is to pair up and find caring individuals, seniors perhaps, who are caring for freshmen. We also have done something with our alumni where we asked the class of 1967 to adopt the class of 2017. And we're trying to connect them so that they feel cared for. And this caring really is leading to an uptick in persistence, an uptick in achievement, and I believe in churches, this uptick in caring would lead to better recruitment of people over time. As they feel cared for, they're then able to care for others, which starts to form a cycle, and is very nice. So after we get some stasis and people start to care, then the next thing might sound a little counterintuitive, but it's really quite true. We want to develop tension. Tension is really how we know if focus is happening. if interest is taking place. Tension is the creation of conflict or disequilibrium. It really does bring a problem to the mix. But here's the important thing to remember. Remember the Goldilocks zone. It's got to be the right tension. It's not too much, not too little. The right disequilibrium, not too much, not too little. It's not a church split, which is horrifying to everybody. But at the same time, it's not bringing everyone in and saying, hey, God loves everybody, we're all fine, I'm going to give you some candy. It's somewhere in the middle of those things, all right? So we want to create some tension. This creates something in our system called norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is something we desire. This is why people go to movies. They like the feeling of norepinephrine in their system. It's a positive feeling neurotransmitter. That if you go to the wrong movie, if you go to a horror show perhaps, then you feel anxiety because it's too scary. Or maybe you go to a love, some sort of date movie with your wife or your spouse or your girlfriend, and you are bored because it's not creating enough tension for you. You're not releasing norepinephrine. And that norepinephrine really is a nice feeling. Let me see if I can't show you an example of this inside of an IKEA commercial that played just a few years back.
Many of you feel bad for this lamp. That is because you're crazy. It has no feelings, and the new one is much better.
Do you feel bad for the lamp? I mean, how can you not, right? It's out in the rain, the sappy music. It's horrifying. I've actually asked audiences when I've shown this in the past, what did you think was going to happen next? And usually somebody says, I thought somebody would come rescue the lamp and take it home to a better place. And that's tension, but it's the right amount of tension. It's not so overwhelming that you can't go on with life, and it's not so little tension that you don't care. You're sucked into that. That tension, creating that norepinephrine really drives focus and attention. The experiences that you should build around your church should really drive people to places where there's a problem that is solvable, where there's a conflict that is overcomable, that is something that we can do. So you get them to stasis, you show them that they're cared for while they're caring for others. You then start to create some tension, and then you give them the anticipation that they can win, that they can accomplish something. They can gain the reward that they're seeking. They can join together with the church and get to the goal that you're all after. Anticipation is probably the healthiest, biggest marker on this notion of flow, because it releases this amazing little neurotransmitter called dopamine. You've probably heard of it before. Dopamine is released when you play games, when you watch movies. Dopamine is the belief that you can win. It's the belief that you can get what it is that you're after. If you're not familiar with how these cool little devices like the Fitbit and other things that are making their way into our world today are being used in education, it's happening all over the place. Online gym class is a real thing. So a teacher sits back at the home school, and the students out in the world go do whatever they're supposed to do, and it measures their heart rate and their steps and it takes in their caloric intake or output, whatever it might be. This is a real thing. And in fact, these little devices are really powerful because every time you check them, it gives you a surge of dopamine. It tells you something's better. It tells you that something is good. The biggest motivational app today is called Zombies Run. And Zombies Run does two things. It taps into norepinephrine and it taps into dopamine. It tells you with this lovely soundtrack and this narrator, the apocalypse is upon us. You should start running. And so you start running and it says, speed up, the zombies are approaching, and you speed up, and then it's okay, you can slow down. The zombies have been eluded. And it's just a narrative for your run. but it is giving people surges of both norepinephrine and dopamine to the point where they are staying with it. When they're done, they can see if they've gone from one base to the next base to the next base, they get another surge of dopamine. Our devices that we all start to leverage every day, these little phones that we all have, they actually have been linked now to all kinds of neurotransmitter releases. When someone likes you on a social media site, you get a surge. When someone likes your posting, you get a surge. When someone likes something you like, you get a surge. People really, really like this. So I think it leads to an important question for us in education. How are we utilizing social media? I'd like to ask you the same question. How are you utilizing social media? In fact, I'm going to put something here right in the mix. If you would like to take part in this poll, let me start it here. I'm going to ask you to try to participate in this particular poll and see what you think. See if you can participate. After we're done, you'll actually get to see the bars that go across. And I'm sorry, it's making me log in. You know what? Never mind. I'm going to turn it on later. I don't have time. I'm almost done. So I'll turn it on in a second, and you guys can try it. I'll send you the link so you can actually participate. I've encouraged our pastor at our church to bring up some polls during his sermons and ask people to put information up there, to answer multiple choice questions, to participate in the experience, because it gives them that rush of dopamine. So the last thing that I want to recommend is reward. And this is really when you've reached flow, you've gone through this entire thing from stasis to caring to tension to anticipation to reward. Reward, when you achieve it, is something you want to repeat. It is absolutely the epic win, as you might hear in gaming terms, but it is hyper-connectivity. It is people coming together and saying, I did this. We won. We won together. I won in my own environment. And this kind of reward is really crucial for people to want to repeat something. If they don't feel like they're going to win, then they don't feel like they have won when they get there, and they don't want to repeat that cycle. But if they feel like they can win, if you've given them dopamine over that tension, which has built that problem, then the reward will be sweet, and they will want to try again. This means that you have to get them into an environment where you are going through this notion of flow so that you can leverage some of these different motivational tactics that you all have. I'll give you one that we're starting to leverage here. There's something called Stick out there. I don't know if you've ever heard of this website. Stick will allow you to say, hey, I want to do something. I want to lose weight. I want to save money. I have a goal. It asks you to go find some referees to help identify if that goal has been reached. And then you go in and you commit your money to an anti-charity. In other words, you commit money to a charity that you would never in a million years give your money to. Something like the American Nazi Party, perhaps. And then if you don't reach your goal by the time you set, and if the referees don't agree, that money comes out of escrow and gets donated to that charity. Now, that is a heck of a motivator. That is absolutely a stick and not a carrot. But the reason that people are doing it is because they can point to that reward and say, I did it, I beat it, I got there. Now, it's motivational on other levels as well, norepinephrine and dopamine. However, that reward matters to this generation more so than any other generation before. They want to feel rewarded, like they made it, like they got there. If you can create an environment where people are experiencing stasis, feeling cared for, which leads to caring for others, giving them tension so that they can feel like there is something that needs to be fixed and dealt with that is absolutely fixable by creating anticipation that they can do it, then once that happens, they will want to repeat the cycle. And they will not only come, but they'll stay. And that is, I think, how we start to get to a place where we can experience flow in churches. The really practical outcome of this, and I've already basically said all of these, let your millennials help you with strategies about how to get other millennials. They have a random factor that we just don't have the older and farther away we get from that. Encourage socialness. Avoid predictability, because that's what drives focus and attention. Outside of care, you want that to be predictable. You want people to feel like they're always cared for, but the content of your presentations should be different. The way that you do things as a church should be unique, because that gives us attention and focus. Feed people healthy food and let them sleep as you bring them to your church. Create intentional caring experiences. Make sure that you're fostering that. Don't just assume that it's going to happen, because people aren't necessarily naturally good at doing this. Build tension through your stories, your sermons, your experiences, your goals, and then drive toward using social media to start to see how that's how you're winning, how you're getting there. Create that culture that says we are going to win this. Not that we're always losing, not that the life is coming down, crashing on us. We're going to win this. And then let all of those opportunities come out of the measure that says we won. We made it. We had an attainable goal. Here's the goal. It was reached. Now let's do that again, because that was a lot of fun. That's what millennials are actually seeking. That gives them purpose, as Simon Sinek talked about at the beginning. That makes them feel like there's impact, but it also makes them feel like it's comfortable and a place that they would like to be. If you've never done it before, if you would for me, just at the end here, would you take your hands, put them out in front of you, clap them together, and then fold them incorrectly and set them in your lap? It feels weird, right? It feels uncomfortable. I know that what I'm asking you to do here today may not be how you experience church. It may not be what you're coming to this in terms of your own traditions and your own experiences, but I think if you start to look at what's right, what actually works for this generation, it requires flow. It requires getting them to a place where they can put in that kind of experience and effort, and then you'll get out of it exactly what you're trying to. I'm going to open it up for questions at that point. I hope this was of interest, but please, what questions can I answer?
Okay, Stan, we need to make sure everything's unmuted. And gentlemen, we've got about 20 minutes or so. So what questions would you like to ask Jeff?
The question that is kind of just rumbling around in my head, partly because of my context. I'm in a church that has gotten very, very older demographically, and I love to think about reaching a new generation and incorporating some of this. My question is in your experience, or have you seen studies on how this approach to flow would maybe adversely affect someone maybe who is 55 and older? Is there going to be too much of a tension as we move in that direction?
That's a great question. It's one that I get often from our faculty who don't want to do some of the things we want them to do. And they start saying, look, we've got students, our average age of student here at St. Leo is 37, which is pretty unique. We have a much older population. People have tried to create studies that say this is not appealing to older students, and it hasn't panned out. They really do appreciate some of the same things. Now, they don't necessarily appreciate all of them, but they are often willing to help. And when we start going to our older students, our 40, 45, 50-year-old students, and saying, look, can you help us with these 18, 19, 20-year-olds? They're happy to do it, because their belief is, of course, 18, 19, 20-year-olds don't know anything. Now, the 18, 19, 20-year-olds don't believe that, but that's okay. We get this sort of culture of help, this culture of collaboration, which goes back into the caring. So not only do they feel cared for by the administration, who they want to feel cared for by, but they then start caring for the younger students, which is appealing to them. And it's amazing how many times we give a student a mentorship, and the mentor gets more out of it than the mentee does. And they really. So the treatments aren't always exactly the same. Sometimes we have to split duty and we have to do two different things, one for the millennials and one for the older students. But then we try as hard as we can to always bridge those things back together so that they are coming together on some sort of common ground.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Rod.
I guess what I was taking away from it was not just church culture as a whole, but specifically preaching. People tend to say intuitively, I liked that or I didn't like that. I think if you really analyze what they're saying, you probably would find that the sermon that they like has all of those components in it. Wouldn't you think? Yeah, I mean, like sermons where I've gotten really good feedback, and then breaking down those specific characteristics. And I think even just explaining the gospel should have all of that in it, right? You should have that tension of sin, but then that Christ overcame on the cross, the resurrection, you know, I mean, and then the reward is, I mean, so all of those things play out in a healthy message. And I think that whole boredom piece too is so big as far as just losing people or saying things that are really kind to people, even in the context of a sermon. And they're just like, wow, great, I don't care. You know, I mean, for me, I thought, man, this could really do well, like in a seminary course for preaching. I love stuff like this. So I just thought it was very, very applicable. It was challenging.
No. So I approach all of my talks this way. I try to create some tension, which I also try to create uniqueness. One of the reasons we did all of those little exercises, those activities with the coin and with the immediacy and then with the video, I want you to have moments that are unique, that are new, because that really helps you focus. And then I wanted them to create tension. Well, wait a minute, how does that work? How can I deal with that? How can I make that happen? And if you don't have moments of tension that you come back to time after time, you're going to lose your audience. They'll get bored.
Right. It's kind of counterintuitive. I think you said that, but it's just so true. Like, people just don't want to hear how great everything is and that you're glad they're here. I mean, you want a piece of that, but you don't want to just live in that as a speaker, because people will phone you out and wait for the football game in their mind that's coming at 12:30, right? I mean, so I don't know. Paul spoke at our church, and I thought he did a nice job of that. You know, as far as, you know, here's the challenge. It's achievable. Praise God for the problems that you're having. You're growing, but we need to move in this direction. You know, so there's that caring, tension. Here's the reward and achievable success. I don't know. It's very fascinating to me.
Another question. Thanks, Rod. Appreciate it.
Jeff, I got a question. I know a lot of times most people actually do not think that they are influenced by marketing, because it's almost kind of a humbling thing to think that somehow somebody out there is having an effect on me, and so they kind of deny that. So I'm thinking the same in this way. A lot of people will look at that, who are leaders in a church, and say, okay, I understand the millennial, that's how they're doing it. How much work do you do, both at faculty or at a church, at helping non-millennials understand their flow and how it connects to a different? Because I wonder if people are that self-aware. We tend to talk about the narcissism of the millennial, but do you talk about the flow characteristics of a non-millennial and how that trumps or doesn't trump in terms of reaching the millennial?
Yeah, absolutely. The faculty in my context, this is almost all. This is the thing that we have to be really continual about and very intentional about, is making sure that we're always filtering things through how to communicate with another generation. Even my own generation, Generation X, that the communication model changed between me and the next generation behind me, and then the one behind it. And as I communicate, you know, with my own dad as a baby boomer, we also communicated differently. Information was treated very differently than information and persuasion, which then it was information, persuasion, and entertainment. And as soon as you bring in entertainment, the people who go, no, it's just information, that you're watering it down. No, it's just a different style for that generation. So as I start to deal with that in my context, I'll tell you how we do it. We go into curriculum conversations. One of the first things that I like to say to people is, I will be on your curriculum committee if you will allow me to take out a portion of the curriculum. Because the idea is always to pack more in, and pack more in, and pack more in, and pack more in. And that's what you know, the boomers or the busters loved. More information. I'll read more. I'll pay attention longer, because they have more focus dedicated to those kinds of modalities. They love to read. They love to be talked at. That's how they learned to learn, if you will. As you get younger and younger and younger, that is not the case. And I would actually argue younger people do it better. They do it right. So they not only want the information, they want it to be persuasive, which really goes back to, if you really want to go all the way back to Aristotle, you're going to talk about passion, credibility, and logic. And you got to have at least one of those things, but ideally all three of them. You have information, persuasion, and you have entertainment. You make it fun. You make it interesting. That's why a narrative matters. That's why the anecdote matters. That's why that tension that comes out of the narrative carries the information and the persuasion with it. And if you don't do that, you are really reaching a very small percentage of your audience. Even those who grew up being talked at all the time aren't very good at remembering what they hear just by hearing it. And the research on that is really clear. So even for them, finding ways to share with them, hey, there are a few better ways that we can do this. If you can start to convince them over time, because it's scientifically accurate, whether they perceive it to be true matters, but it scientifically matters. So if you can start to convince them there are better ways by which to communicate, by which to connect, then eventually you get everybody on a little bit different platform.
Do you think that some of these characteristics that aren't very desirable in that generation, like the millennials, do you think that they'll self-correct over time? Or is that just going to be the way they are until they're in a nursing home?
No, that's a good question. Some will, some won't. I think for some, there is a real blow to the ego and to the head that comes in when they find out the way they were raised doesn't hold true. So some will do something with that. They'll kind of pull themselves up by the bootstraps, as it were, and figure it out. Others will, get pushed down and stay there. I think a church is in a really interesting and unique position to try to help people in both contexts to do it better. Businesses don't care so much about that. If you're pushed down and staying pushed down, they'll just let you go. But, church, you're going to go back to the caring concept. Shouldn't. So you could probably help with that.
Jeff, you're in a church plant, in essence. That's where you attend, and you've been in church all your life. In the last year or two, as you have gone to church, what's been the one thing that you have seen that happens consistently that gets you out of the flow as an individual as you sit there in church? And what is something that has happened that says, hey, if we could do this more consistently, it would put us in the flow? Be very, in other words, specifically, what do you observe?
Yeah. One of my biggest frustrations at our church, and full disclosure, the preacher of our church is one of my best friends. We hang out, our families hang out. I think he likes me because I'm a PK, and so he doesn't have to put up a front with me. But we just hang out. And I will say to him things that other people won't say to him, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. It frustrates me that our service is so predictable. And I mean, you can set your watch by how many songs we're going to sing, how long it's going to go. We're going to take the offering. Then he's going to get up and he's going to speak. In fact, they get out and tell you. Predictability is the environment that he came out of. Now, he came out of the North Point organization. And in all fairness, Andy Stanley's communication to those guys was, look, we were the only hot dog stand in town 30 years ago. You're a different hot dog stand. You need to do things differently. And unfortunately, I don't feel like in that regard, we're doing things differently. Andy Stanley says predictability matters to his audience. And maybe it does. It does not to a millennial. So that's one of the things that really frustrates me is that we don't have a day when it's all theater. We don't have times when we sing at the end instead of at the beginning. We don't have times when his sermon is cut in half by a commercial or some sort of vignette or skit. We don't do sketches. We do the same thing every time. And you can see the other people in the service, they come for a couple of weeks and then they go. Because it's just, Tampa is not a very good, it's a very hard place to do church. A lot of people are unchurched here. So they're looking for what we're talking about here. Now, the stuff that I like, and I spend as much time, it's a meta-analysis every Sunday. I just go there and I stand and I look at what people are doing. The communication that he does is excellent. He's a very strong communicator. He really does leverage story well. I think sometimes he tries to push, the information over the story, and I constantly am trying to pull him back and say, do the story, just do the story, get the story out. People will make the connection. And so in terms of his preaching, I think he does a good job connecting and relating through anecdote and through narrative and through metaphor and through analogy. And I think that that's really important, and people will come back for that. So those are two examples. I can give you others if we have time.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions any of you would like to ask?
If we were to have a leadership team read a book, other than the one I think you recommended it, and if you will, repeat that one again, what would be a good book that would help an introductory multi-generational leadership team look at these concepts?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple that I would kind of put out there for different reasons. One of them, the one that I suggested around neuroscience, is called Brain Rules. And it really is a primer for how neuroscience works. And it's got a lot of far-reaching applications. He applies it to education, to business. I think you could easily extrapolate that into your context. That's one. Another one that I know has kind of made the rounds there is Rise of the Nuns, which specifically talks to generational differences. I'm seeing some nodding. It looks like some of you probably already read that. And then the other one that I like is called Now You See It. Now You See It was written by Kathy N. Davidson at Duke. And she goes in to describe what people need in which to connect and remember. Now, it's highly educational in nature, but again, I think the context is not far for you guys to make the leap. It's just one step to the right. You're doing it all in parallel. So Now You See It by Kathy and Davidson would be the third. Right? Now You See It, Rise of the Nuns, and Brain Rules. Just a promotional thought here. If I would switch to Generation Z by James Emery White instead of Rise of the Nuns, because it's up to the next generation. And in fact, I just sent this book to Paul. It's got some really great application points to it. So,
what is that again, Stan?
It's Generation Z by James Emery White.
Meet Generation Z. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for taking your time to do this and for trying to boil down what I know you sometimes spend all day talking about at conferences and whatever. And thanks for serving us and serving the church this way. And it's been very, very helpful. And so I appreciate your willingness to do that for us.
The only other thing I would suggest, another resource that you might look at is if you do a search on YouTube of Jeff Borden, he's got several of his videos up there. I would encourage you to look at them because he takes this and a couple of other things. I love the illustration of the attention span of the next generation that you have. You had the goldfish illustration up there. Just really good videos, just as a kind of a follow-up to this, a little bit longer in length and perhaps a little bit more pointed. Any of those in particular, Jeff, that you're aware of that you might recommend?
The one that I did at Spark Growth, the Spark Growth Conference.
Okay.
That's about 2 years old now, but it's got some really good stuff when it comes to the platform I use of Education 3.0, which is neuroscience, learning research, and education technology.
Yeah, for those guys whose boards you have a tough time getting them to read books, it might be better to show them a video. They might actually a little bit better. But anyways, just some resources to follow up on that. So Jeff, I really do appreciate it. I was really excited to be able to have you do this, and look forward to perhaps connecting again.
All right.
Well, thanks to you all.
Okay, thank you. And Stan, thanks for making all this work. Appreciate it.